Okay, good. So first of all, let me start by introducing myself. My name is Britta Guldmann, and I'm a conversational AI consultant with Artificial Solutions. I work in the customer success department, so I work with clients like yourself who are in different points of your journey with conversational AI. And one of the things that I also do in the department is training and giving sessions like this, where we make sure that you are up to date with what's happening on the platform, so you can make the most of it at any time. And that is, of course, the main topic for today. So we'll be talking about the latest version of Teneo, what is in there, what can it do, and what are all those new good benefits that you can make use of when you migrate to Teneo 6. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing my screen here, and then we'll start talking. Yeah, so what's new in Teneo.6? Okay, and I put it here as Teneo.6 because actually the session that we're having here today is covering several platform versions. As you can see, they're mentioned here. So it started, of course, with 6.0, but we're actually already now at 6.2.1. So we have 5 different platform versions that we're going to be covering today. 6.0 was released in March 2021, and the latest version was released in December 2021. So a lot has happened in those 9 months. Okay. The session is going to be me explaining these different new features to you and also showing you what they look like inside the platform. But at any time, if you have any questions, any comments, something you would like to understand, then do feel free to interrupt, raise your hand, post a question in the chat, anything that works for you. And then I'm more than happy to take your questions so that we can make it as dynamic and interesting as possible for you. Okay. You're all currently working on our platform, so there's probably going to be something that you can relate it to. So if there's some doubts there with how these new features work compared to what you're used to, then just say it out loud, and we'll get those questions clarified. Okay, so let's get started here. I'm just gonna switch to this one. Highlights here of Teneo 6, because a lot has happened in these 5 versions that we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to focus on some of them, and there are some that we will mention just so that you know that they're. But we're going to go more into details with the ones that you see here. Okay, so we're going to be talking about what's new on flows and triggers. And when we talk about flows and triggers, we're going to be talking about a concept that is called match requirements, a concept that is called data actions, and then also something that is called ToDo Labels. So we'll see what that is. In terms of machine learning, there's also a couple of updates, which involves a new class manager and a new class performance evaluation tool. Okay, so those are 2 things we will talk about. We'll talk about a major update that has happened to what is called the localization setup, which you may know as the master local structure. It's had a slight name change also, but apart from that, of course, the interesting thing is all the new features that have been implemented there. So we'll talk about what those are and what that means in terms of how you can work with the master local setup. There's also a new feature called version flags. We'll see what that is and what that allows you to do in terms of working with different versions of the content inside your solution. We have released now an API for Teneo Studio, and that's a new API that's being rolled out for this platform. So we'll see a little bit about what that is and what you can do with that new API. There's a new and reworked tryout, and we'll see what that means and what can you do now with tryout. And then we'll talk about some enhancements in terms of history and solution versioning. So there's a new solution log. You have increased the version history on elements, different documents in the solution, and now we also have a recycle bin. And finally, one of the highlights that we'll look into is what is a new script event that is called the pre-logging script event. Okay, so those are the highlights. As I said, there are more like minor or not so minor. They're still important, but there are much more, and I'll show you some of it just to highlight or to also mention those. But these are really the big changes, and those are the ones that that's probably going to impact most how you work. So that's why we will focus on those, and the other updates we'll tell you about them, and you can of course also read about them in the release notes that are now available online. Okay, so those are the highlights, and with that said, I will get started. So the first area that we'll be having a look at is this one with flows and triggers. Okay, so what's new inside this header bucket here of elements that I have named flows and triggers. So first of all, there's a new layout. So when you open Studio in Teneo 6, then you will see that the flow window, so where you go to build all your conversation logic, has been changed a little bit. So on one hand, you have here, you can see now we have a panel to the right where everything, all the like the different features and properties that you can define on all the different nodes sit. You had it to the right before also in Teneo 5, but now the difference is now that you're only going to have one panel. Okay, so instead of having multiple that will open next to each other, there's going to be one panel only, or there is one panel only, and then we have bars here so you can navigate with that. So here is just a screenshot. I will show you with more detail when we open Studio what it looks like, so you can see it a little bit better. But that's one of the first new changes here in terms of the flow window. Another change that you will see when we open it is that you get this new flow overview here. So you actually can get the big picture, right, of all your flow content. When you have big complex flows like the ones you have here, or deep flows with a lot of question and answer pairs or different nodes in general, then it's sometimes difficult in Teneo 5 to see where you are, right? And now with Teneo 6, well, you have this flow overview here that will allow you to navigate also inside your flow, zoom in, zoom out, etc. So it's going to become a lot easier to move around inside your more complex flow structures. Yeah. So that's also a change that has happened in terms of the layout. Then you'll see that there's also a change related to the transitions. For instance, here, the transitions in Teneo 6 are all full lines. Whereas where you before in Teneo 5, you had some lines, some transitions, they would appear as full lines and some would appear as stippled lines. That has also changed. So now instead of having the difference between full line and stipple lines, what you have is that you have this little icon here of a little person, and that is indicating to you that that you're actually waiting for a user input here. So that's the new way of knowing if your transition is going to consume a user input or not. So those are like the major changes here in terms of the layout of the flows. Apart from that, you will see also, of course, there's changes in terms of a lot of icons that we have added to make it everything much more visual and easy to identify from the top level of the flow what you're actually working with on all the different elements of the flow. When we go into Studio, it's going to be a little bit easier to see when we can see a little bit bigger than these screenshots here. But that's like an introduction to what you can expect to see in terms of simply the layout of the flows. Okay. Then the next major change we have in terms of flows and triggers is that we have simplified the triggers. So where we in Teneo 5 had different kinds of triggers depending on how you would want to understand the user input, now in Teneo 6, we only have one kind of trigger. Okay, so there's simply one trigger that you can create, and on that trigger then you decide how you want to actually understand what the users are saying. So we've simplified that to make it much more intuitive. You don't have to select from the beginning if it's a class trigger or if it's a syntax trigger. Now you simply add a flow with the trigger, and from there on, you go and you build your intent recognition as you need to. Apart from, like, let's say, the natural language understanding that you have on the triggers, you now also have match requirements that are not simply or only based on the natural language understanding. So as you can see here in this overview, we also now have the option to add, for instance, a little piece of script in a script field on your match requirement or as a match requirement, or even a scripted context. All of those are considered now match requirements. Yes, Catalina, you have a question?
Yes, I'm just wondering about the trigger part. If at this moment we have both class triggers and syntax triggers, will we have to be will we have to do some type of refactoring, or will we still be able to read those differences now that in this new version we only we only build one trigger and it kind of knows like what will happen with those flows that has both syntax and class triggers?
The ones you have now, you mean, so when you migrate
Yeah.
to 6, it's fully backwards compatible. So when you migrate, when you take your Teneo 5 solution and put it into Teneo 6, the platform knows how to convert what you have now into the new version. So if you have a flow with a class trigger, it will automatically be converted into a trigger with a class match requirement, for instance.
Perfect.
So, and the same for like anything that you have with syntax, well, it will automatically be converted into a condition match requirement. So those are the two options that you will see when you migrate. You don't have to worry about refactoring everything. That's already been handled, or that will be handled when you import the solution.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good. Okay. Oh, let me see. I have somebody here. I just need to let in. Good. So apart from the fact that we now have this new way of dealing with the natural language understanding and the concept of match requirements as such, one of the things that we're also achieving with this new setup is that the data that you use for your for training your machine learning classifier, so you know that whenever you want to use a class, well, you had to add in a piece of data, right? And your class was instantiated and added into your machine learning model. It was the same data that you would use, the same examples that you would use to create the class, and then afterwards use that for testing when you were running your auto tests. In Teneo 6, now those two, like say, collections of data will be separated. So you will have a set of data on your triggers that will be the data that you can use for testing for your auto test. And then you will have a set of data that you can use inside your machine learning model simply to train your model. Okay, so when we get to the part about the machine learning, we'll see a little bit more about how that works. But achieving that split of these two types of data is now also going to be native inside the platform, which is a huge benefit for you in terms of testing and validating that the performance of your machine learning model. Okay, so that split is going to also be super interesting for you to get. So that's what the new concept of match requirements. Match requirements exist on triggers, but they also exist on transitions. Okay, so the same way as before, where on transitions, whenever you were you needed to put in some sort of a condition on your transitions, you would also normally do it with a syntax condition. Well, you also have now the full range of match requirements that you can use on your transitions to determine what is it that should be the requirement before the user can go down one transition or another one. Okay, so that is a new concept here that we're introducing in Teneo 6. Then the next new concept that we're introducing is one that is called data actions. Okay, data actions also sit on triggers and transitions, the same as match requirements. And data actions are, let's say, a way of doing, of extracting data or doing some sort of action based on what is going on in the conversation at that particular moment. Okay, so you can have it, as you can see here, of different kinds. It can be based on different, let's say, conditions, let's call them like that. You can have different activators of this data action. It can be based on a linguistic element, such as an entity or a language object. So whenever they are fulfilled or picked up, these two, well, then you can do something based with this data action. It can also be a listener. So the listeners that you know already from Teneo 5, they can also, they're a type of data action now. And it can be a little piece of script. Okay, so basically this is something that you can do whenever you traverse a particular point of the flow, either a trigger or a transition. Okay, so then you can say at this point, there's something that I want to do. Typically it's for extracting data, the same way as you would do with listeners. Okay, so whenever you hear something in the user input, then you would set up a data action to extract information based on whatever linguistic condition that you have put in. But as you can see here, it can also simply be a piece of script where you're saying, when I go down this particular transition, for instance, well, then I want to do a scripted action. So then I'm going to go in, I'm going to define a little piece of script, and then I'm going to do whatever that script defines. Okay, so those are data actions. It allows you to be much more sophisticated and complex than you have been able to before. You had the listeners only as what you could do on these different points. Well, now you have much more options here, and as you will see, well, it's built in and interacts with whatever you have apart from the data action on your trigger. Well, then you will see there's already a lot of logic built into it when you can see that when we go into Studio. Okay, that's another option. They are, let's say, they're not replacing listeners fully, but they are adding in an additional, let's say, level of options compared to listeners, right? Because listeners, you have them already. You had them in Teneo 5 that you can use to extract information on triggers and transitions. Now simply the tool set that you have to do that is being expanded, so you can do much more than what you could do with the listener. Yeah. Concept that we're introducing on a flow level or trigger level is this label here, this to-do label. Okay, so the to-do label, as you can see here, is a little yellow label that you will get on different parts of your flows. And they are there to help you as developers see what have you not done yet inside your flow. It's particularly useful, of course, for new developers, somebody who's just getting started on Teneo, that they will help you understand what you need to do on triggers and on outputs or transitions to make your flow fully functional. But it can also be very useful for those of you who are already have been working with the Teneo for some time, because it allows you to put in, like, let's say, a quick mock-up of something that you want to build, a quick mock-up of a flow, a conversation that you want to be able to have without building out everything, just to see, like, visually, how is this gonna flow inside this particular flow. And then you can still see afterwards, when you want to actually build it out, where you have to go to add in all the details of your flow. Where do you have to go in to add conditions? Where do you have to go in to add an output text, etc. That will be highlighted with this new to-do label, so you don't have to take notes and remember where you left something pending. Now the system will highlight it for you, so you can go in and find it easily afterwards. Yeah. As I said, it sits on triggers and it sits on outputs and also on transitions. So those are the 3 places where you will see these labels. Yeah. Oops, sorry. Okay, good. So those are the updates related to triggers and transitions. And let's go have a look inside Studio what they look like, so it becomes even more tangible. I'm gonna bring up Studio here. Okay, so this is a Studio 6. This is a free trial environment, so you can go try it out for yourself if you haven't already done so. As well, when you look at it here, you can maybe already quickly spot some other differences that we'll come back to later. But for now, what we will have a look at is what we have talked about so far, everything that has to do with flows and triggers. Okay, so to begin with, I'm going to start. I'm going to create a new flow so we can see how these 4 new elements that we talked about, what they look like. So let's see what the to-do labels do in action, how we can work with the match requirements, the new flow layout, and of course also the data actions. Okay. First of all, now when I go to create a new flow, you will see here, you still have the drop-down menu, but the drop-down menu is just going to give you the option to create a subflow or a prompt flow, what you could also do before. But all the different, like all these distinctions between different kinds of flows that you know from Teneo 5, they are gone now. So whenever you want to create a flow where you want to understand the user input, now you simply click up here, and then you are going to create a flow, and it's going to be the same kind of flow no matter what it is that you want to understand. Okay, so this is the same, my flow name, etc. Nothing has changed there. So I'm going to create this flow that is called what is the cube. Okay, and when I have given it a name, I am going to go to the flow editor, and now we can start seeing some differences here. Okay, here you can see already we have the to-do label. So I have the to-do label here on my trigger, on my output. And when I look here at the panel to the right, I also have the to-do label here telling me the first thing that I should look at with relation to my trigger. Okay. When I hover over this little question mark that I see here, I get some pointers to what it is that I need to do. I'm being told that I should define at least 1 positive example and at least 1 match requirement. So those are the the bare minimums for a trigger to work. Okay. I'm going to do that, so I'm going to take and I'm going to add some examples here. I have them already. I can paste them in. And when I paste in all my examples, you can see now my to-do label jumps to the next section. Okay, so now I've fulfilled the first criteria with adding in examples. And I need to go to the next one. So that's the first one. The to-do labels, they will move dynamically also as they are being fulfilled. Good. Now you can see my my organization panel here. We'll have a look at those also to see how they actually work. But before we do that, well, we will have a look at the next to-do label. Where am I taking now? What is the next here that I need to do? That is the match requirement. Actually, I can click here, and then you can see I'm being moved to the next element, or to that match requirement element that I have clicked on. So this works as navigation, that I can move up and down as I add more elements into this trigger. Well, this is going to become useful, right? Because then I don't have to scroll. I can just click on the particular element that I want to work with. So the next one that I want to work with here in terms of my triggers is exactly the match requirement, right? So the next thing I need to do here is to add at least 1 match requirement so that I can understand what the user is saying. I have the options here when I use the add functionality. So you can see I get to select here which kind of match requirement I want to add. Do I want to add a class match requirement using machine learning? A condition. So when I need to create a complex or more sophisticated condition, syntax condition, I will choose this field. This is the equivalent of what you know now as a syntax condition from Teneo 5. Okay, so that works exactly the same way. One of the new options here is that I can add an entity. Okay, so if my match requirement is an entity on its own or nothing else, well, then I can select this one. I can also select a language object, same principle, that if I want to use a language object as my condition or as my match requirement, then I use this one. And then I can select a script. If I need to add in a little piece of script, I'll get a script node field. or I can use my context, so all the scripted context that I might have globally inside my solution. Okay. If we start here from the top, if I say that I want to add a class match requirement, and I do that, you can see then I get this blank field here where I can define the name of the class that I want to use. It also appears now here over in my trigger, right, that I'm using a class. So it gets indicated here on my trigger level what kind of match requirement I'm using. Now, I have two options actually here. I can now say that I want to use, if I want to use a class, I have two options. I can say I want to use a class that already exists, and then I can click here on this little folder icon here. That allows me to browse all the classes that already exist inside my solution. Okay, so here we're already like sneak peeking into the class manager that we will have a look at later. But all of these are all the machine learning classes that already exist inside my machine learning model. So in the case that I know that the class that I want to use already exists, well, then I can go in here and I can select one of those. I'm not really sure here if my class exists, so I can filter and I can see, well, I do have some classes here with the name cube, but not really the one that I want here. So I'm not going to be picking any of the ones that I have already. I'm just going to click cancel here, and then we'll have a look at the other options. But I could go there. So if I want to reuse a class across multiple triggers, now I can do that natively. Okay, so I can just go find it in my list of classes in my class manager and then use it here. It's not a problem at all to use the same class in multiple triggers. Of course, you then need to make sure that there's something else that distinguishes the two triggers, but simply to say that in Teneo 6, reusing a class is now an option. Okay. So let's remove that again and then have a look at the other way that I could add in a class match requirement. If I'm getting started here and maybe I'm new or I don't know exactly what would be the best option for me to understand what the users are saying here, then I also can get help from Studio. And Studio here can help me draft a solution, a match requirement, depending on what I have as positive examples here. When I do that, if I use this option, what is the default is to generate a class match requirement. So if I click here now, the Studio is going to take all my examples here and then create a new class inside my machine learning model based on these examples. So now right now, I'm not going to have that split, as I mentioned before, between the learning data and the data for my testing. Right now, I'm going to have the same data here. My class has been generated based on this using the same examples, but from now on, then the split is going to happen, right? So whatever I do from now on, I'm going to have different sets of data, or I can have different sets of data on my trigger and in my class. But I wanted to show you here that simply creating a new class, adding a new class inside your machine learning model can be just as simple as it is right in Teneo 5. You go in and then you generate the class directly from the trigger. Okay, so that's what I've done here. I've added a class. The name has been auto-generated. What is the cube? Based on the examples or the flow name, depending on what you have inside your solution or inside your flow. Okay, so that is one way of doing, another way of doing it, another way of adding a class match requirement. Yeah. If I want to use a condition match requirement, I can do that as well. So you can see now I'm starting to mix them here. This condition field is going to grow as you add more lines, but it's basically the same as you know before, with the advanced options that you also know from Teneo 5, where you can go in and ask also the system to draft a condition for you. You can add a limit on the unused words. All of these functionalities are the same as the ones that you know from Teneo 5. Okay, so I could also go in here and ask the system to draft a condition based on my example questions. And then I'm going to get a syntax condition here with all the operators, etc., that we already know from Teneo 5. So let's see if it comes up with a condition here. Good. Having these two together, of course, does not make much sense. So this is just for the purpose of showing you that you can actually have them here, but there would not be much sense in having a full-blown syntax condition together with a class match requirement. Okay, so this is just for illustration. And there it was. Good. So now we have the complex field here with a lot of options for a syntax condition. Again, same as Teneo 5, if you use this option here to have the condition generated, you of course want to review it to make sure that it fits your purpose. You probably want to optimize it to make it more compact, etc. But you have the helping functionality here that would allow you to go in and generate a complex language condition. Yeah. I'm just going to remove this one again because it's a little bit long, and then we're going to have a look at the other one here. So now, if it turns out that my match requirement should be an entity, for instance, or I want to also use an entity, I select this one here, and then you can see I automatically have the dot entity here that is indicating that the language object or the entity that I want to use is of this kind. Okay, so here what I can do if I stand on the white field is the same really as in any condition field. I can start writing the name of my entity using control space to get suggestions here. So if I want to use any of these, I could say, well, maybe I want to use this one here, and then I am now making reference to that single entity here. I can't use any kind of operators or anything here. This entity match requirement is simply only to reference one single entity and nothing else. Okay, so that's all that I can add in here. If I don't know what entity that I want to use, or if I want to see what options that I have, I can also go browse here. So that's the new functionality. I can click here on my folder, and then I can go, and now I can actually browse anything that is inside my solution. Not only anything that I have created for myself, so I could have in here, I have my project-specific entities. I can select those, but I can actually also go into the whole lexical resources. So everything that I have associated to my solution or with my TLR, I can now browse that when I'm creating my my condition. So I can go in here, for instance, and find all the entities that I have available and select the one that I want to use by this navigation menu. Okay, so that's a new feature that we have added into these match requirement also. So that's another way of doing it. For the language objects, it's really the same. So I can go in here also and select a language object. I can use again the navigation here, or the folder browser, to see what language objects do I have available. And you can see here for the language objects from the TLR, there's quite a lot. So now you get like a preview of everything that you have inside your language, inside your TLR, sorry, with this browser here. So I could go in here and see all the kinds of lists that I have, etc., and find the language object that I want to use. If I know what it's called, I can go in and I can write it in, and I can select this one here, and then I'm all good. So if I now have these ones here, for instance, I have a language object. I want to make sure that the word cube is inside the user input, and this class, what is the cube, should also be my top intent. Well, that, for instance, could be the way that my trigger should work, right? This would be a hybrid match requirement where I'm combining two kinds of match requirements on the same trigger. Important to remember that when you combine or when you add more match requirements on your trigger, they're aggregated and they all have to be met, right? So it's the same as an or, sorry, as an and expression here. It's not an or, it's an and expression. So you're saying that the language object cube and the class what is the cube have to be fulfilled. These two criteria, they have to be fulfilled, both of them, okay? So the match requirements here, they add up and they all have to be fulfilled in order for this trigger to be able to fire. If you need to distinguish, if you want to have something that is more complex and something that is more simple, well, then you need to add several triggers as you have been doing so far, where you then create the different levels of complexity, okay? But on one single trigger, all of the requirements, they have to be met, okay? Let's just quickly have a look at the last two here just to see what they are. So if I add a script match requirement, you can see I get simply a script node field. So I can go in here and add a little piece of Groovy script that should also be true. So maybe, for instance, if I have a variable where I need to check if it has a certain value, etc., well, then I can go in and I can do it here natively in a script field instead of doing it in a condition field, which is what we have been doing so far, for instance. I can also go in and add a context. So the same way we could also in Teneo 5 go in and select our global scripted context. Well, I can do that here. I can also find global variables, everything that you have been able to do also in Teneo 5 in terms of the global scripted context. Well, you can do that as well here. Now they simply just sit below the header of match requirements. Yeah. When you have more than one match requirement on your trigger or on your transition, as you've seen, when I add in something new, they just go on top, right? So they pile up in the order that I add them. Maybe it turns out that for maintenance and optimization, that there's a particular match requirement that you want on top because you use it more. Well, then you can actually reorganize them, right? So you can see here, you can drag and drop them and place them in the order that you find most relevant for you inside your project. So maybe you prefer to have the language condition on top because that's the one you touch the most, etc. So you can move them around to your likings. You can even add names to some of them, as you can see here. So if you have different blocks of conditions, well, then maybe you want to name some of them so you can identify exactly what that block of condition actually does compared to the next one, etc. So that's what you have here in terms of match requirements. And all of that applies to triggers and to transitions. So same thing on both of them. Good. I'm going to remove this here again because we are not going to be needing that. We'll just leave it here with the class match requirement and the language object. So these are the two match requirements that I want on this trigger here. Now I'm just going to give it a name here so we can see what it looks like. So now we get the more clean view here where we have the name of the trigger. We can see what match requirements we have on, how many examples that we have added, etc. And then we can see we still have a to-do label here left on the output. Okay, so when I click here on the output and I go here, well, then it's telling me here that I should implement at least one answer text or an output parameter. So these are the minimums that you have to think about when you're working with outputs. Oh, yeah. So I'm just gonna put in an answer text, and when I then click in the white space, you can see then my to-do label is removed, and now I have, in theory, I could say that my flow is done. Okay, I say in theory because, of course, you know that there's plenty of more things that you would want to do with a flow. You would want to, again, adjust the trigger ordering. You would want to run the auto test, etc., before you could say that this one is done. But in terms of to-do labels and match requirements, well, now we have seen how they work. Last thing, just to show you with the to-do labels, apart from seeing them here on inside the flow, whenever you're creating something new, oh, sorry, let me just remove this one here, the output again. Save my flow. You can see I'm leaving here the to-do label in. When I do that, when I have a to-do label on any of my elements, as you can see here, it will also appear in the flow overview. So when I'm inside my folder and looking at all the content, I can also see here on top level if I have some elements that have not been completely built out, where there's still some work left to be done. Okay, so it's highlighted here as well. If I go now here and I add the output back again, now we can see here the label is gone. So now I'm meeting all the criteria for this to-do label to be removed. Yeah, good. Questions so far? No. Then the last new element in terms of flows and triggers were the data actions. Okay, so let's just have a look at these data actions. And to look at those, we're going to have a look at this other flow here. That's a little bit more complex. You can see also here, for instance, the flow overview starts becoming useful, where I can move up and down in my flow. So when the flow is off the screen because it's too long, well, now I can start moving around the flow with my flow overview. Yeah. Good. So the data actions, they also sit on triggers. As maybe you've seen that they sit here, for instance. I can add a data action here, and they sit on transitions. Yeah. So as an example, to show you what you can do with data actions, we're going to have a look here on this example on a transition here. In the flow we're looking at, I want to buy a cube. We're in one of these flows where we need to fill some slots. We need to pick up different pieces of information in order for the process to be able to progress and eventually reach the point where the chatbot or the voice bot can submit the purchase of this product called a cube. Okay, and then to pick out these pieces of information and fill those slots. Well, one of the options that you have now in Teneo 6 is to use this data action here. So a data action could, for instance, be based on an entity, as we saw before. And as you can see here in this example, the system is already prompting me saying, actually, if you're saying that you want to create a data action, do you want to do it based on this entity that you're also using as a match requirement? That's a high possibility that that's what you want to do. So it's selecting or suggesting that I select this entity as the basis for my data action. Okay, so I can select that one here, and then it's already being filled in as let's say the condition, the linguistic condition that has to be met for this data action to kick in. When that's the case, well, if that's what I want to do, then I can add in a mapping, as it's called. And to do this mapping, it's really where I do this propagation of information. So if you remember in Teneo 5, you will often use something that is called a propagation script, where you're saying, okay, if I have this condition that is being met, then I want to do something, right? So it's actually really this kind of logic where you're saying some kind of linguistic criteria has to be fulfilled. When that's the case, do a little piece of scripting. You can, of course, still do that little piece of scripting, but what we have built into the interface now is a native way of doing it, so you don't have to think about adding in the little piece of script. You can go in, select the data actions, say what entity that it should be based on or what language object, and then say, okay, now from this entity, the NLU variable that I have inside the entity, I want to store it inside one of my flow variables here, inside the SCube model mentioned. So now I'm actually, with this here, doing the same as the propagation script, propagating information from inside the entity into a flow variable that I can use inside my flow in the further processing. Okay, so that's what I can do here with the data action. As we saw also, there can be other the data action can be based on other pieces of information. It can be based on a language object. If you do it based on a language object, you get the same option here of adding in a mapping. So again, it's very similar to the entity, simply two different kind of language objects that you're using. You can also add in a listener, as you know them, with your little linguistic condition and a little piece of Groovy script here at the bottom. Or you can go in and simply add a piece of script, right? So if under all circumstances there's a scripted action that you want to do, well, then you can go in and add your little piece of script here to do to store a piece of information that is more programmatic than based on natural language, of course, but those are the options that you have in here. So those are the data actions. Yeah. Again, they sit on transitions and they sit on triggers. So those were those. Here you can also see in this flow, for instance, now that I can show it to you a little bit bigger, this is the new icon that is telling you that this input, this transition here is of the type get input before continuing. Okay, whereas the other one that I have here without any icon on is of the type that continues without input. So that one will just be these two output nodes here. They will be concatenated. This is the equivalent of the stippled line that you know in Teneo 5. Yeah. So far, so good.
Yes, very good.
Yeah. Okay, then we're gonna go on to the next topic. So we're gonna go back here to the presentation and I'm gonna introduce you to the next topic. The next topic, the next new set of features here has to do with machine learning. When I say machine learning here, I'm of course talking about the native classifier inside Teneo Studio. So that's where we have been putting in a lot of updates as well. One of these updates is this one, the class manager. Okay, so we saw it just a preview, a little bit of sneak peek before, where we could get an idea about what classes we had inside a solution. And this is what the class manager looks like when you open the class manager in itself. Okay, so the class manager as of Teneo 6 is the place that you go to when you want to work with your machine learning model. Okay, so you no longer go into each individual flow and work on the triggers where you're instantiating the class. You have one centralized place now where you work with all your classes. You can import entire training sets, for instance, here, if you want to add new classes into your model. You go here to edit them, to delete them, to add, remove examples, all of that is done inside your class manager as of Teneo 6. Yeah. You can see how many examples you have on each one of your classes, and there's some additional features here related to some of the new master local functionalities as well. All of that is now controlled here centrally from your class manager. So it gives you much more control over your machine learning model than you're used to from Teneo 5. Then from the class manager, well, sorry, what is really the benefit, again, I will say that, repeat that, with your class manager is that you can separate completely what you're using for training and creating your model. That is all what you're putting inside your class manager. And then you have separately on your triggers, you have a set of data that you use to run your auto test to validate that you're actually able to fire off on that trigger as that you would like to, etc. And then, as I said before, well, from now on, natively, you have the ability to use one class as a match requirement on multiple triggers. So that a use case for that would typically be that you have like a superclass where you're understanding all intents related, for instance, to purchase, and then you combine that with different products and the individual triggers, right? So similar to the case I was just showing you here with I want to buy a cube. Well, maybe you have different flows for different products because they have to go down different processes. Well, you have one class for I want to buy, and then combine that with all the different products that you want to sell using syntax, using a keyword, a language object, etc. as another match requirement that you combine the class with. So those are new options that you get. Apart from that, you can actually also now have classes that you don't use. So if there's something that you want to add into your model to maybe simply to make your model aware of certain expressions, but it's not really something that you're going to trigger on, but you need to create that little bit of variety inside your model. Well, then you can create a class to do that without ever using it. It's not a problem. Okay. Well, you can evaluate now the performance of your machine learning model independently from the performance of your triggers. Okay, so that is really what you also achieve here. So you can you get much more control, as I was saying, over your machine learning model in itself as a part of your natural language understanding on its own. So let's go to the next section here where we can see, okay, what does it mean that you can evaluate the performance of your classes separately? You're now getting a class performance evaluation tool. Okay, so you will run this tool on your on all your classes. It will do what is called it's called a k-fold. It will bend the data. It will iterate over the same data 5 times with different like splits of the data, etc. Really, if for those of you that know about machine learning, it's gonna sound familiar. If you don't know the details of machine learning, don't worry, the tool will do it for you. But it will run like a standard process for testing and evaluating the performance of your machine learning when you set off or fire off this process. Once you have run the evaluation, what you will get on one hand is this kind of graph here. That will tell you that the precision, well, it will give you 2 metrics actually, or rather it will give you 3. It will give you precision and recall, these 2 metrics that you see here. Precision and recall are also standard terminology inside the world of machine learning, where with precision and recall, we're measuring how many times or how good is your class at understanding what it was supposed to understand, all of the things that it was supposed to understand. Could it understand it? And how many times did it understand something that it was not supposed to understand, right? So those are the 2 metrics that we're working here with precision and recall. Precision is the number of times that we understand the right thing, okay? And nothing else. So how good are we at detecting what it is that we want to detect? Whereas recall is then the metrics for saying, okay, if I have 100 that I need to understand or need to identify, do I, out of these 100, do I identify all 100, or do I maybe only identify 50, or is it 80? So how many of these when do I start to miss out on something? When does my recognition become too precise? Okay, so those are the 2 kind of metrics that you talk a lot about when you talk about machine learning. The interesting thing here, of course, generally speaking, is to find that place where these 2 metrics they meet. So where's the intersection of these 2? When are you really good at understanding the right thing without being too strict and missing out on something? Okay, so that's the balance that you often are looking for with machine learning. That balance here is, thank you, David, is the typically there the point that that is what tells you where your solution confidence threshold should sit. Okay, so if you recall from your current implementations, your solutions will have a confidence threshold, which per default is 45. Okay, so that's what you have per default. But it could be that when you run this solution performance evaluation, it comes out like this, saying to you, well, actually, you should consider setting your solution confidence threshold to 55 instead, because that's where the precision and the recall, they meet. Okay, so maybe you're going to get better results if you tweak the confidence threshold a little bit. So that's one thing that you will be able to see now based on the solution or the class performance evaluation. Okay, the other thing you will be able to see like in a graphical view is also what is called the K1 score, sorry, F1 score, and we'll have a look at that in the solution, and then we can see what that means. So that the F1 score is like the harmonic mean of these two elements here. So that's also an indicator of what's the right solution confidence threshold for your solution with the classes that you have. Good. When you run the evaluation tool, you're also going to get this table here that will tell you how each individual class is performing. So, and how good is it with these scores here in terms of precision, recall, and F1 on an individual class, right? So not the graph that we were seeing before was on the entire solution. Here we can really deep dive into each individual class and find those classes that may be problematic, where you have a lot of false positives, or you have a lot of conflicting classes, etc. So you can really deep dive into those and work with your machine learning model in depth to make it work as possible. And it also allows you to compare the performance of your model over time. So when you run this evaluation tool, again, then you can compare to the previous run to see, okay, have I improved the performance of my model? Did it go down? Any kind of tweaking that I did to my model, what impact did it have on the overall picture? So you're going to get something like this. Yeah. So summarizing, you get a powerful tool here that will allow you to work really deeply with your machine learning model, identify conflicts, overlaps, poorly performing classes based on all of these metrics here. So that is what you're getting with these new features. So again, let's have a look here and to see what they actually look like in the solution and where you can find them. Good. Okay, so we're going to go back here. The class manager, so where you go to create and manage, edit, delete, etc., all your classes, sit up here in the top ribbon. So you can see I have it up here. And when I click on it, I get a little window on its own where I can manage all of my classes. Okay, so they're ordered here alphabetically. I can see how many examples I have for training my model on each one of the classes. I can do everything that has to do with the management of my classes. So adding new ones, deleting, editing, all of that, I do it from here. Okay. If I need to import them, I can also do it from up here. So I can import all of my classes, etc. I can filter out of them. So for instance, here I want to see new class that I added before, what is the cube? Okay. Actually, I can see now that other classes that I have here in my class manager, they follow a different naming convention, and I realize I probably want to follow the same naming convention here. It's going to be easier for me to work with, so I can go here and rename it to make it structure here. So now I want to call it cube info what is, so it follows the same naming structure. I can save it here, leave a comment. Field here, or flow, language object, etc. And now the name is updated. Okay. From my class manager, I can also see where all my classes are used. So the same way that you know from language objects and entities, where you can go and see where they're used, well, you can do that with your class manager. And I can see here that cube info what is being used inside the flow. What is the cube? Okay, so I can go back and forward here, managing all my classes. Basically the same way as you know it from Teneo 5 with your language objects and your entities. Yeah. Now I changed the name also of the class here, and then there's really this nice feature here that the system is actually now able to feed that information back into my flow. So you can see this is the flow that I created before, and that name change has been fed back into the trigger that is making use of the class, so I don't have to worry about changing the name of the class in all the triggers or transitions that make use of a class. So that's been updated automatically. Okay, so that's the class manager where I go to edit, delete, etc. Everything that I need to do with the classes. Now, in terms of knowing how my classes are performing, well, then I will go to the solution backstage. I will find the optimization here, and then you can see I have a new tab up at the top here that is called class performance. And here's where I can see, for instance, this confidence threshold graph that we were seeing before. So I can see here that this overview of precision and recall, where I see that the cross section of these two in my solution here is also, yeah, around 0.56, 0.58. So I want to change the global settings of my solution confidence threshold. Okay. I have the option to see the F1 score also, so I can see where that starts falling off. So when am I being too demanding or too specific? So when that one falls off, then I reached the limit. Okay, so those are the two tables that I can see here. I can actually also compare. So if on these graphs here, I can also compare to a previous run. So if I'm running, updating my model and doing modifications, I can see if I'm improving or not the performance of my solution here. So I can see here there's actually a little bit of an improvement, right? It's holding longer compared to the previous run. So that looks like it's the right thing. I can also go here to the other table that I showed you before, and then I can see, let me just do it simple first. So if I have a simple view here first, here I can see all my classes. I can see the score in terms of precision recall and F1 for each individual class. I can see how many examples it has. I can see how many classes it conflicts with, how many false positives and false negatives I have, etc. So all of that is displayed here in a table view where I can go in and find any like problematic classes. I can sort them, as you can see here, based on the numbers. So maybe this one here with the low precision, well, maybe this one is one I want to work with, or maybe I'm working based on the F1 score, and then that's my guideline here, saying the ones with the low F1 score, I want to look at those. This one here, this table can also be compared to previous runs. So when I do that, you can see here, I get the colors here that is telling me that if something, the difference in performance, did it go up or down? So I have some that perform slightly worse, some that performs a little bit better. I can also see that I've added in new classes into my model since the last run, so they cannot be compared, of course, to the previous run, and they get this little star here. Yeah. So I have a lot of information here that I can use to really zoom in on the performance of my machine learning model to optimize it and make it work even better. Good. So that's the machine learning components. Questions to this?
Nope.
No. Okay, then let's just get this one out here and continue. So the next new feature, our next set of updates that we have has to do with the localization setup, aka master local. So master local, a lot of updates. For those of you who work with it, I'm sure you'll be happy to see all these new updates that we've implemented. So one of the updates in terms of master local is that in Teneo 6, you now get to choose what documents should be sent to your local solutions and which ones should not. In Teneo 5, everything is pushed from the master solution to the local solution, so you cannot decide, you cannot be selected. That has changed in Teneo 6. So now you have full control saying this bunch of documents should be inherited. This other bunch of documents should not. Okay, so you decide. That means that you can now use the master solution actually as a working solution. When we say that, that we mean that you can, for instance, have now elements in the master solution that like the TDR, like all the small talk, for instance, that you have in, let's say, English in your master solution, you have it in Spanish in a local solution, and Swedish in another local solution, etc. And that's not a problem anymore. That was a problem in 5, that the master solution in 5 normally was not a working solution. It was a solution you would go to create the flow structures, and then you would have a local English solution, a local Swedish, a local Spanish, and those would be the solutions that you actually push out to production, to the publications. As of Teneo 6, you do not have to have that split between the master, or let's say it in a different way, you can use the master as a solution that you actually also publish to production. Okay, so that's a very big change here. You can also, in Teneo 6 now, turn the updates on and off. In Teneo 5, the updates are sent immediately to the local solution as soon as you save. But as of Teneo 6 now, you can say, wait a minute, I'm going to do a major update to a flow. It's going to take me a little while, so I don't want to bother my local developer with those updates just yet. I want to finalize them, make sure everything is working before I send them to the local solutions. So before I start doing my work, I'm actually just going to turn off the updates. Okay, so I'm turning the updates off. I do my updates, and when I'm happy with that, I turn the updates to local solution on again. And at that point, then the developer of the local solution will get the ping, the notification saying, hey, there's actually something for you to inherit. Now go grab this new updated flow and localize it into your language. Yeah. This means that you will see now these icons for including and excluding all over the place on individual documents, and also in the top ribbon of the flow, or sorry, of the studio home panel, because now you have to decide. Okay, so before you start branching a solution, if you're creating a new solution, then you have to select the documents that you want to include in a local branch. Okay. And then you can go and branch it. For those of you who are maybe migrating a master local setup from 5 to 6, then the default setting when you migrate is that everything is set to include. Okay, so you don't have to go and select everything. That will be set automatically when the system detects that it's a Teneo 5 solution that is being imported. So yeah, per default, you will see the same behavior as you're used to. And from there on, of course, you can go and then you can start working with the new features in Teneo 6 and say, well, actually now I want to turn the updates on, I want to turn them off, etc. By using this include exclude functionality. There are some things that have to be included, or that were not. Sorry, that's first of all here. There are some things that you can mark as include exclude. So you can see here, all these are all the ones where you get to decide if they should be included or if they should not be included. And then there are things as now that will always be included, such as global scripts, ordering groups, metadata, and resource files. Okay, so those are not elements that you can choose to hold back from the local solutions. They will be there. But for instance, a flow or a class or a language object, you can decide if they should go to the local solution or not. Okay. You will see the icons you will see now in the master, that's actually the new thing, right? In the master solution now, you will also see which flows or which elements that have been marked for inheritance. And you will see that they get this little arrow pointing down here. So there's an arrow that indicates that all of these elements here have been included into the local solution. They can have two different colors. So if they are white, or if the background is white, that means that everything inside this folder, in particular that's on folders that you will see it, not on individual flows, but on a folder level. If you see on a folder level that the icon has a white background, that means that all the content inside that folder has been included in the branching. But if you see that it's half purple, half white, that means that it's a partial selection. Okay, so as in the example you can see here, there are some flows here that have not been selected to be included, but the others have. Okay, so that means that on the exploration panel here, we will have two colors on the icon. In the local solution, as you know already, there is an icon also telling you that this is a local, well, it's an element that has been inherited from the master, sorry. That already exists. You can already see that visually if the element is inherited from the master, but the icon has changed a little bit. So now it's a purple shield that will tell you if the element is master controlled or not. So you have the purple shield both on the folder level and also on each individual document, where you can see this purple shield that indicates if it's master controlled or if it's a local element. Okay. If you have a document that has been included, so you have created your local branch, you have sent your flow to that local solution, and you want to do, as I just said before, do maybe a major rework of that element, then you decide you want to pause this update. What you do then basically is that you go and you exclude the document temporarily. So you will go here and you will select the exclusion. Let me go back here. So you can see here, now you select it to include, and then you set it to exclude whenever you want to put the updates on pause. You exclude that element again. When you do that, the element is not going to be removed from your local solution. It's still going to sit there, but simply it's not going to get the updates from the master until the developer in the master solution decides that it's time to send the updates to local again. Okay, so nothing is going to be removed. You're simply not going to get the updates. To remove something from a local solution, it's the same as now. The document has to be deleted in the master solution before that update notification to delete the element is also sent to the local solution. Okay, so there's no changes in that. But it's really a powerful thing now that you can turn the updates on and off, so you're not interfering with or sending like updates to the local solution while the work is still in progress. Inside Studio, let's have a look again and see what that looks like. Okay, so you can see here, and when I'm on the home panel here, my options to include and exclude sit up here at the top right. So right now, these elements, for instance, here, they're not included yet. So I can go here, for instance, and I can say I want to include this particular flow in a branch, and now I get the arrow pointing down here, and on my folder I get the symbol with two colors, right? Because I only have one element that's included and all the rest has not been included. Okay, so if I want to do that, well, now, for instance, I could go one by one and select that, but I can also go here on a folder level, say, actually, I want to select everything inside that folder. So I'm just going to click here and include the entire folder. Yes, I want to include subfolders also. And then I click that, and everything is being set now to be included in a local branch. Yeah. What I would not want to include here is, as I just said before, everything that is small talk, because in my local solution, I would use the TDRs in that local language. So I don't have to translate all of that, because we already give you that out of the box, right? So if I'm going to create a local solution in Swedish or in Danish, then I would want to use the TDR, the dialogue resources from that language already. So these ones, I would leave those without marking. Here in my training resources, well, I know that I want to grab this flow, for instance, here. So I would include this one as well and say that one should go into my local solution, etc. So I would have to select here what I would want to include. Remember also that you can and should select your classes as well. So I could go in here and like do Control A and select all of my classes, and then it's now going to take a little while for it to set to include all of these classes here. But I can do that to also then assure that the match requirements that I'm sending along to my local solution developers will also include the classes, right? So I can, the same way that, well, I can like point them to what kind of classes they would want inside their classifier. Okay, so all of that can be done here. So now I would select all the elements, my flows, my classes, my global elements here. Do I want all of these variables, for instance, also to be included, or are they specific to my master solution, my scripted context, etc.? I really now get to choose and pick which elements I want to send to my local solution. So let me see if the classes here finalize soon. It takes a little while when there's so many. Good, now I have all my classes here. They've all been set to include. Perfect. Then what happens now is that if I want to create a local solution, I would go out here to the solutions and say, well, I want to branch it the same way I've done before, right? And then I want to have the content that I've set from the master, but actually also add in my my Danish language resources, because I'm going to create this solution here in Danish. So I'm going to say that it's Danish. I want the Danish TDR, and I'm going to call it like this so we can see what it is. Okay. And now when the branching starts here, it's going to grab the TDRs, add it into the mix with all the flows that I've said that I wanted to inherit. And then now I have the flows that I need to localize from English to Danish, and combined with the Danish TDR that I'm now getting in, all of that has been prepared so that they can coexist. Okay. So that's the new feature here. This is going to take a little while here. So meanwhile, let me just show you this other one I already prepared in Spanish. So you can see here I have the flows that I inherit. And then I have here the Spanish dialogue resources. Okay, so I'm able now to combine everything that we saw before in the master solution in English is in here in Spanish. So I have the Spanish dialogue resources put in here instead of the English ones, and I don't have to think about translating or in any way getting all of these elements in. They were imported automatically when I did the branch, the same way that the Danish language resources, they just were. Good. So I have my Danish one here. It's done also, so we can just have a look. So now we can see here for Danish, now I have it here. The safety net, the greeting message, all of the small talk has been added into the mix together with the flows that I had in my master solution. So, good. Questions about that?
Yes, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I understood you well, but I'm going to ask you a question, then maybe I'll understand better. Does this mean that the flows that we have now, they will be translated, and we will understand customers when they write something in English? Or is it just for us to be, so we can translate and understand what these different flows are called and what they mean?
You have to go in and translate them to the local language. So say, for instance, here, the master solution is going to have a language, right? That's typically the language that of your company, or the one that most of you speak. It doesn't have to be English. It often is, but it doesn't have to. And then when you do what I just did, saying, okay, now I'm going to branch into a local solution in Danish, in this case, it could be another language, of course. Then I, as a Danish native speaker or and developer on this project would then go in and say, okay, so the developers of the master solution have built these six flows here with conversations that I want to make available for my Danish-speaking audience as well. And then you would go in here, you would open the elements, and then you would go through these in a process of localization where you would then have to go in the same way as you do with an English solution or whatever language you work in. You would have all your positive examples here. Then you would think about, okay, how do I say that in Danish? And then you would replace all of these here with the Danish or whatever language it is variant. And you would adjust your condition coding so that it reflects Danish. You would update your language, your answer text, of course, so that they're in Danish. So all of that is the process that you would go through to make it available to the Danish market.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. The big benefit of this setup that we have here is that the whole, like, let's say, the logic of the business has been developed already, right? So when I get all of these flows here, I don't have to think about the business process. I don't have to think about any integrations, anything. All of that has already been built for me. So as a local developer, what I really need to worry about is the natural language understanding part and the outputs, right? So everything that is specific to that given language, I will go into my local solution and I will work with that to make sure that my Danish-speaking users can interact with my bot as well. Good. Okay, I'm just going to open this one here. So if there's no more questions about the new master local features, then we will continue. No? So the next one here, version flags. Okay, so version flags, a new and very interesting feature that has also been added to support really the development process of your projects. You will, with the version flags now, be able to have your documents, and when I say documents, I mean flows, language objects, variables, all of that, in two different versions. Okay, so you can have now what is called a stable version and a latest version. Okay, so when you work with it, you are now actually going to be able to say wrap up the work on a particular document, say this one has been tested, finalized, and this one is in the stable state. Okay, this other one here, I'm still working on it. It's still in the latest state. It's in process. Okay, so you can have documents and the entire solution really in these two versions as you work. Why do you want to do that? Well, because you can then have processes running in parallel, right? You can have, on one hand, a development process going on, and at the same time also maybe a release process going on. So while your developers are developing the next sprint, you also have your QA testers testing the previous sprint, and they can do that now in parallel. If your QA testers find out that there's something that needs to be fixed in the stable version, you can go in and fix that particular element, put that particular element in a new stable version, and then continue. Okay. Another use case is that you can do hot fixes. So imagine that you're in the middle of your development sprint, you're developing new features, etc., and something occurs. You realize maybe that you have a bug on your on production that needs to be fixed urgently, or maybe there's some kind of emergency, a pandemic that just explodes, and you need to put out very urgently some new information about that. Then you can do that. You can go in, you can fix that bug, you can add in that new element, test it, make sure that everything works with the stable version, and then put out a new stable version without being worried about all of the elements that you had that were in progress. Okay, that's a limitation that you have in Teneo 5. So in Teneo 5, whenever you publish, you will always grab the latest image of all of your content and release that. Okay, so as of Teneo 6, you can now work with these two images of your content in parallel, which will allow you to be much more flexible and responsive to these situations where you have to do something urgently, or where you have simply because your development work runs in parallel processes. Okay, so that's what you're going to be able to do with version flags. As I said, you can have two states, latest and stable. You have to activate them again. So if you do not use it, you will have no icon on your flows. But if you go in and activate it, then you're going to get this little flag here saying that if it's yellow, then it's saying, okay, the stable version is also the latest version of the document. If it's gray, then you're saying that the stable version is not the latest version of the document. There has been some changes to the document since the last time you set the stable version. So maybe on this one here, you're in the middle of doing some updates, but you have at a previous moment in time set a stable version on that document. Yeah. Version flags when you're inside Studio, you can use it in 3 different places, as you can see here. You can use it in tryout. So when you are testing your content in tryout, you can, of course, also test those 2 versions to see how any updates are working or how the latest version of your content is working compared to the stable one. So you can do that. When you run your auto test, you can also distinguish between the 2 versions. So you can see if those fixes that you have made, how are they working together with all the rest, etc. And then when you publish, you decide which one of the versions you want to publish, if it's the latest or if it's the stable. Okay, you get information in the auto test to see if you have been testing on stable or latest. The same way when you publish, you can also see if you have published the latest or the stable version. Okay, so it's really transparent what it is that you're doing. No, should be no doubt about that. Version flags come also with a set of requirements. So to be able to use them, for instance, there are some elements inside your solution that have to have a version flag. Okay, as I said, you do not have to use the version flags, but when you decide to start using them, then you have to make sure that you set the version flag on these elements that you see here: solution properties, lexical resources, the global listener ordering, the intent trigger ordering, and the prompt trigger ordering. Okay, so on these 6 elements, you have to have a stable version. If you do not have a stable version on those and you try to work with stable versions, either in tryout, publishing, or in auto test, then you'll get an error message. Okay, so the system will tell you that it cannot run the stable version because something is missing. Okay, so the system will not let you really progress with a stable version unless everything is in place. For all the rest, you choose if you want to set a stable version on those. So that means flows, language objects, entities, your classes, all these, the rest of the global elements, the solution resources, etc. You get to decide if you include them or not inside your stable version. But you have to then also remember that anything that is not included in the stable version will not be taken into account. So if there's a flow that you do not set a stable version on, and you then go test the stable version, well, that flow for the solution or for tryout in that given time simply does not exist, right? So it will not be taken into account. You have to remember to set the flag on all the elements that should be considered when they should be considered. Okay. Set the flags. You can do it in different ways. You can do it either individually on each individual document or global element, or you can select multiple. So on a folder, for instance, select multiple and then do it like that. Or you can select an entire solution version. Okay, so that also already it points into one of the other new features that we have with versioning on the solution. On individual documents and on the solution log, or if you go into the solution logs, you really get to decide what particular version of the documents that you want to set the stable version on. Maybe it's not the latest, maybe it's a previous one. You get to decide. If you select multiple documents like in the folder, well, then you're selecting the latest version and setting that one to stable. Yeah. When you start generating logs with this flag activated, you will also be able to see it inside the logs, where those logs were generated. So if they were generated on a stable or on a latest version of the document. Of course, in production, you would only have stable. That would be the idea. But of course, on QA and on dev, where you may be doing some testing and some trying out, then probably want to keep in mind what version or what revision that you're actually testing on, if it's the stable or the latest, so that there's no confusion. Keep in mind that when you start working with these flags here, then if you delete a flow that has the stable flag activated, then that flow or language object for that matter will not be removed from the pack of stable documents. Okay. So you can be in the middle of a maintenance process and say, oh, actually this document should be deleted. So you're going to delete it. But that doesn't mean that your stable version will break or be different. It will still be part of your stable version. So when you reach that point where your stable version has to be updated and changed and not include this particular element that you have deleted, well, then you have to take a deliberate action on it by unsetting it on that element, or by, as it says here, set a entire solution revision as the stable version. Good. I'm going to show you also what this looks like in Studio, just to make it clear. Okay, so let me just collapse this here again. So you can see when we're on this folder level here, when I'm in the Explorer panel, I also here up at the top have these two flags here, set and unset. So this has to do with the stable version. When I want to start setting the flags, I can do that. So as I said, I could go here, for instance, on an individual document, say that I want to set the version flag as stable. So now my latest version is the same as my stable version. Okay. I can choose to set on multiple elements. So for instance, here I could set all of them and then they would all be set. And then I'm grabbing, again, the latest version, setting that as my stable version. Of course, when you just get started with this, when you start working with this, going one by one is not going to be the ideal solution, right? You don't want to go document by document, probably, setting the stable version. So here the option that is most ideal, I would say, or more like at least an option that you have, is to go into this other new feature here, which is the solution log. So you can see here, there's this new section for history, and here we can go in and we can really see everything that has happened, everything that has been updated and changed in your solution from the beginning of time. Okay, so this is a complete log of all the changes that have happened inside this solution from the moment it was created until now. So what I could also do here, what is maybe to begin with the best way of doing it, also to make sure that you don't forget any of the features that you, or any of the documents that you want to include, is that you select, for instance, a revision. So you say here, actually revision 64 should be the latest one. And then you can go here and set everything that to stable. So everything, all the documents as they were on revision 64 should be set to stable. And that means everything, all the language objects, all the flows, all the global elements, all of them as they were at this given moment in time have now been set to stable. Okay, so that's a good way of making sure that you get everything with you. So I can also, for instance, check here. Now you can see all my classes, they have the flag. Everything has been marked as stable now, and I can now start working with my stable version. That means, for instance, I can go here to try out and I can say I want to work with the stable version now, and then it will switch. Okay, so now tryout needs to regenerate. It needs to create that stable version and allow me to talk to that. Okay, how does all of that sound?
Yes, very good.
Yeah. So while this is just switching, it's really same as reloading tryout here, because it has to create a new and a completely new image. Okay. Again, also for the model, all the elements here, they now have to be updated. Okay, so while it does that, I'm just going to try here inside the what is the cube flow. Let me just open this one here. And then let's modify the response. Okay. And when I do that now and go back, you can see here, now the flag has changed to gray. So that means now that my latest version is different than my stable. Okay, so if I now start talking here in the stable version, I will still be getting the previous response before I modified it, because that's what it looked like when it wasn't stable. Now I have a different version here that I can use because I'm doing updates, etc. And I want to change the response. And now I see how everything works together. So I can use it here in tryout. As I said, I can use it in auto test. So when I'm in auto test here, I can also select which one of the versions that I want to use, if it's the latest or the stable. And when I publish also, I get to decide if I want to publish the latest version or if I want to publish the stable version. Okay, so that is these are the options that I have. What is the cube? And you can see here now, I still get the full response with the way it looked like before I did the update. Okay, so I can have now these two different versions of the same document living inside my solution. Good.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Is there a way of working when it comes to this stable and not stable version? Like, because you can choose which one should be included in a release, but in my ears, it sounds like the the stable version, is that the gray one?
If it's the gray one.
Yeah, that's the stable version, right?
No, the stable version is the yellow one.
Okay, so so the latest version should be the one that is released. Is there a way of working, like how to handle
that depends. That I would it's not really the way it's thought, right? It's thought that the stable version is the one that you want to release. So what may happen now, let's say I'm in the process of updating this flow here, what is the cube? And something else comes in and I want to then release let's say I want to add an additional flow into my solution. I'm not done editing this one here, the what is the cube. I still have a lot of things going on here. So I have a latest version and I have a stable version because I have the flag on here, okay? The gray is telling me that stable and latest are not identical, okay? There's two different versions. Yellow is telling me that stable and latest are identical. That's what the colors they mean. But when I release, if it's to production, of course, if it's to production, what I release to production, is in, let's say, the thought is that what you want to release to production is always going to be the stable version, right? The stable version is the one that you have tested, you have validated, and you have tried it out. So what I can do right now actually is that I could go now and I could release my stable version here, and it would still include this response with the full sentence. Even though if I open my flow right now, it doesn't sit there anymore because I have removed it. I'm in the middle of the process. But I have a flag on this flow here that is saying that I have set a stable version, and that stable version here this means that from now on, every time I or anybody else in the project works with the stable version, this is the revision of this particular document that will be used. Okay, so anything that happens beyond is not going to be taken into account when the stable version is used. If I then want to change it, let's say this is actually the one that I want to put to production here, because that change is the one that's the hot fix, right? This is the fix that I needed to put in. Then I will go here to this particular element and set that one to stable. Okay, so I'm going to change the stable version to the latest one. And then I can go ahead and release my stable version with this new fix that I've made. And now you can see it turned yellow here, and then the fix will go out.
Good. And then I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way in this version, this new Teneo version, that you can see, because you can see the on a flow, you can see the different versions a flow has had through history, but can you compare those versions with each other? Can you actually know what has been changed?
You can always go in and open the previous version. So the same way that you've been able to previously, when you go in here and then you can open it. So let's say you want to compare with this one. I can go in and I can see revision 1.3. Okay, so now I could go in and say, okay, so what if this was the stable version, what was actually different? And then I could say, okay, so I can see here there's different at the response, for instance. Ideally, of course, you've also left comments when you have done when you have saved your flow, when you've made the changes. That gives even more context to the difference, right? But but you can always go back and open previous versions in read only.
So it's not like highlighted in any way that here there has been a change here in this condition or something like that.
Not at current, no.
Okay.
It's not. No. So you would need to either be able to identify it visually, or
exactly.
Your developers, I mean, when you save, you always get the option to leave a comment, right? So if you have a comment, then it makes it easier to understand what the change is actually about.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So those are stable version. When you migrate, the stable version is not going to be set, as I said before. So you get to like find out at what point do you want to start working with that, and then using it, yeah, as you feel comfortable using it. Good. Let's continue. Still plenty of things to talk about. Other updates apart from the ones that we've seen so far. So one of the big updates actually also in Teneo 6 is that Studio now has its own REST API. Okay, so that means that you can now go interact with Teneo Studio without actually opening Teneo Studio. It's not a full-blown API yet. It will be, okay, so with every new release, new methods are added into the options here of the REST API. But you can see here some examples of what you can do with this for instance, API. Sorry, you could, for instance, kick off the auto test externally with this API call. So that means that you could program it. You could program it to run every night if that's what you want to do. Say at midnight every night, I want to run the auto test so that I have the results in the morning, and then I can see how is my solution going. Or you can be manipulating your machine learning classes. You can enable or disable content. You can actually talk to the tryout engine if that's what you want to. You could even program a publication, many different things that you can do. To get the full overview of what methods are available right now, you would go to this website here. Okay, so I can just bring it up. You can see here we have, it's available online, so you can find it via Teneo AI also. But here you have all the methods that you can use right now. So you can see here we have auto test, different things you can do with your classes. All of this is what is available at current. Okay, and as I said, it's being built out all the time. So eventually you would be able here to do basically your own, manage your solution without ever opening Studio. Not sure you want to do that, but technically it's going to become possible, right? So you can go in and manage all of your content without opening the solution. Yeah. Another one of the updates that we have has to do with tryout. So we saw just before, we saw tryout as where it normally sits, right here to the right in the home Studio Home panel. But as you can see, this has actually been simplified, this version that you have here. So now if you want to get the full picture, you go here to the advanced tryout. So I'm just going to open it here, and you can see here, this is the advanced tryout where now I can do, well, a lot more. I was about to say I have an easier access to all that information that was available also in Teneo 5. And it's been visually laid out in a different way. I can follow the process of the input from when it comes in the input phase. So everything that happens with it as a request before it actually fires any triggers. What annotations does it get? What happens in the different scripts that are being kicked off, etc. Then I can go in, I can see the path that the input goes on. So what class was it matched with? What trigger did it fire off? What flow was fired off, etc. And I can see that whole path that the input goes through until the output. Okay, so in this case, we just have a simple output without any output parameters or anything more, but I can see that here. Then a very interesting thing also now, which is a new thing, is that you can get a state overview. So that means really seeing what is the state of the conversation in my solution in this point. What's the value of all my global variables at this given time of the conversation? When you have more sophisticated and complex conversations, being able to track that state is really super helpful for debugging, right? When did my global variable change value? What value does it have now, etc. I can go in and I can track that in the state overview here. And then, of course, you have the engine messages, as always, where you can go in and see if there's any warnings, anything going on with the engine that you need to react on. Yes, Katarina.
Yes, I have a question about the APIs. Are there any API created for the log data that Teneo can receive, so that you can actually call this API and get the log data from what has been from all the conversations? Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's actually a different API, but that one already exists. The Inquire API already exists, and you can already go in and do API calls into Inquire and extract all the data from there. So that you have that option already in Teneo 5. It's not new in Teneo 6. So in the Inquire API, it already exists. What is new is the Studio API. So that is everything that has to do with the management of the content of your chatbot. Everything that has to do with the logs and the analysis and all of that, you already have an API available for that.
So that it can be called from elsewhere.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So if you want, for instance, if you're creating your measuring your KPI in another an external tool like Power BI or something like that, you can set up API calls into Inquire to extract the data and feed them into your Power BI dashboard automatically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so this is the advanced tryout where you can see all of these different information, switch between stable and latest, and then everything that has to do with the tryout as before, with replaying, restarting, reloading. If you need to try out with different input parameters, you do that here in the bottom now, etc. So all of that is here. One of the interesting things I think also is that it's actually a separate window. So if you want to look at your flow while you're trying it out, you can do that now. So you have the option to have multiple windows here next to each other. One is tryout, one is your flows, etc. So yeah, you have modularity and you can select how you want to display things. Okay, so solution log, version history, and recycle bin. The solution log, we already saw that this is where you can see everything that happened in the solution, everything that was changed, who it was changed by, when, etc. You can filter out really down to the any change. It's not just the smallest detail, but it's really any change will appear here in the solution log. So you can always go back and see when the change happened, etc. And find out if you need to revert it or whatever. We've also added, well, to be able to do this, to be able to create this big solution log here, we've added a log history on all our elements. So the same way that you now in 5 have a version history, on flows and on language objects and entities, Now everything has it. Okay, so global scripts has it, scripted context, everything now has a versional history. So you can always go back, see the previous version, roll back if you need to, etc. We've also added in a recycle bin. So if you delete some documents, you can now restore them. So you can see here now at the bottom here, I have a recycle bin, and I can go in here and I can see actually I have these elements here in my recycle bin. That's where they came from, when was they deleted, etc. And potentially restore it if that's what I want to do. Okay. So they are all sit here. They all sit here. So that's been added as well. The other big change here that we have added is this new script event that is called the pre-logging script event. So it's a script event that happens after the conversation has ended, but before the logs are written. Okay, so it's really in that interim in between the user stops talking to the chatbot or the session times out, ends, and the log file on the log data storage is generated. In that like lapses of time in between these two events, we now have a new script event that allows you to go in and manipulate your logs before they are written. This is extremely useful for those cases where you want to, where you're working with PII and you cannot store that PII on your logs, or maybe simply you want to anonymize it or encrypt it, etc. That's where you can do it. It's really native inside the platform now. You have this option to go in and say, okay, that social security number, that name, that email, whatever it was that I needed to be able to have the dialogue. Okay, that's good. I had the dialogue, but now I don't need it anymore. I'm going to remove it from the logs because I don't want to store that information inside my logs. You can go in and you can do that. Okay, in the pre-logging script event. Another thing that this event is really useful for is for clearing out large variables so that you don't get issues with solution logs that really blow up. That's something that can happen if you are working with big variables with a lot of data that changes many times during the conversation. We've seen that with some clients where they are manipulating large amounts of data inside these variables. And now you can simply reset them, right? So when the conversation is over, you clear out all of those variables, meaning that the log data size is reduced considerably, creating logs that are much easier for you to manipulate inside Inquire. And also that do not take up so much space on your log data storage. Okay, so that's also a very important element. Inquires much faster on the logs when they're smaller, and you do not need so much space to store all the data. Okay, and generally speaking, you can of course remove anything from the data or from the logs that you do not want to store. So that's what you can do now in this pre-logging script event. Super useful. Apart from that, a lot of, let's call them minor features, but all of them are super useful. Syntax highlighting, spell checking, this propagation of entity variables. All of these are also new features here. I think the syntax highlighting for those who develop the scripts is super useful, so you don't have any errors in the scripts. Also spell checking in outputs, for instance, so you don't make any typo in the outputs. That's really nice. So you catch them on the fly. Okay. Different updates to the other APIs, such as the engine scripting API and Teneo Inquire. With all of the new features, there comes also some impacts on all of those as well. New fields in the logs, etc. So that is there. But apart from that, no major changes in Inquire, for instance. So only new fields with new names. New, of course, languages are always updated. So with new releases, we have new updates to our languages. We have added some new languages to the portfolio as well, such as Czech and Bulgarian. So if any of you are interested in that, know that they're there as well. All the dialogue resources have been reworked so that this master local setup now works seamlessly with inheriting. Okay. The technology side of things has, of course, also been updated. So the tech stack has been updated. Here are just some highlights. If that's something that you really are interested in knowing the details of, I recommend that you go look at the release notes on Teneo AI for full details of these updates of the tech stack. And then for general updates about how we work with things such as the update of Groovy. Also interesting, especially the Groovy update here is interesting to keep in mind, because it's Groovy that has pushed out an update. So you need to know how the new Groovy works to make sure that everything in your scripting, etc., still runs as the way it should be. Okay. And then, well, this one is here a little bit discreetly, but documentation. Everything about the platform is now documented online. If you haven't already seen it, I really recommend that you go have a look at Teneo AI. You can find everything there. There is, actually it's here on this last slide. So on Teneo AI, you have the full platform documentation now. It's not in separate documents. It's all sits there. Reference documentation. You have a forum where you can go ask questions. You have knowledge articles with tips and tricks about how to work with the different features. All of that is on Teneo AI.